Hi, Rohit. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Havish. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
It's my pleasure. Rohit, could you share with us a little bit about your current role and your corporate journey so far?
Great. Thanks, Havish. So currently I lead learning and leadership development at DXC Technology. DXC Technology, as some of you might know, is 152 on the Fortune 500 list. It's an IT services company which uses the power of technology to build better futures for our customers, colleagues, environment, and communities. In my role, I look after learning and leadership development, all the non-technical parts of learning for about 130,000 people across 70 countries. My team is also spread across some of these countries.
All right.
Earlier, I started my career interestingly not in HR, though I did my MBA in HR. I stayed with a bunch of marketing folks, and they brainwashed me into getting into marketing. And so I got into a general management program with a company called P&O Nedloyd. It was the world's second largest shipping and logistics company, and I'm very proud of that. And that's a shaping experience as well. So I worked in multiple places in India and Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and all. And what I did was finally I was in key account management and sales. That was the role that I was in. Then I moved back into HR. I was with Infosys and Accenture for a long time. And in Accenture, I really learned a lot, and I still value that experience that I've had at Accenture. So I did the roles of, started off with hiring. So these were the days when there was huge hiring every year, every month we hired thousands of people and so on, the boom of IT. Then went into HR business partnering, organization development, did competency assessment for 33,000 people across Accenture. And then I moved to a global role in Siemens. That's when I was into a full-time organization development role. Then there was an interesting stint into consulting. So for about 6 years, I was in HR consulting, got to work on extremely exciting projects. Very lucky to work with stalwarts and the founders of, for example, Kurt Kaufman, who's the founder of, who's known as the father of employee engagement. And he wrote a book called Culture Eats Strategy for Lunch while we were working together. And he's acknowledged me in that book as well. It's very kind of him to do that. I worked with Richard Mosley, who coined the term employer branding and did the first, wrote the first book on employer branding as well. So I got to work on some global employer branding projects as well. So extremely interesting projects. And I worked with DDI, which is a pioneer in leadership development. And then through DDI is when I met the CHRO of Sterlite, and we got talking, and I took on the role of organization development head there for Sterlite. And I recently joined DXC about 7 months back. So that's been my my career journey in short.
All right. So Rohit, we have worked in the past together, and something that we have had the opportunity of discussing over a cup of coffee is HR being a profit center or a cost center. I think we are way beyond that point where people will still consider it as a cost center. But I would just like to hear your thoughts on it. In the last 2 to 3 years, how has the role and the way people perceive and look at HR changed? Especially with analytics becoming a very important part, in terms of how HR people are able to use the data, which probably earlier was not happening at the same pace as other functions.
Great, thanks, Avish. I think a few things have happened which have eliminated this conversation to a large extent. Does HR have a seat at the table? Should we lay the table? And all that kind of conversations. I think one is the remote work coming in and COVID changing the entire dynamics. In the last 1.5 years, I've seen HR being at the center stage of business and leading with the business leaders, because all of our assets, which is their employees, are distributed. How do you get all of them connected and together? And as you know, data is the new oil and become extremely important. And HR hadn't used that data so well in the past. They're getting better at it. There's a long way to go, but we're getting better at it for sure. So I've seen a lot of analytics being used now. We clubbing that with other data sources like finance, for example, on utilization, on how are people doing, our certifications, actually helping people to get the outcome that they're looking at. We showing proficiency pyramids to customers, getting them the right people onto projects and so on. So there's a lot that is happening in that space. All of the HR data now goes into Power BI reports and is triangulated with other kind of data, and then we get the output. However, an overall comment, not just for HR, but also other functions using analytics, I'd just like to show a picture, if you don't mind, on what's the state of this, like Havish. So if you look at this, a lot of you might have seen this in forwards. But what this essentially says is we've got a lot of data, but our understanding of data is going down and down. So it's better to have a few metrics that are really important and that you can track rather than having multiple metrics. The analogy that my dad's a cardiologist, and the analogy that I would give is that a good doctor knows exactly how many tests to be done and what is seen in that test and what action needs to be taken. A bad doctor will give you a huge list of tests and then try to figure out what's gone wrong. So similarly, someone who knows data science will know what are those vital few that are to be seen and tracked and then make an inference. The true value of data I see is in the person, not in the data itself. So, so data can never replace people. I don't know if that's a long answer to the short question that you had, but if I've not covered any aspects of that.
So Rohit, that's very interesting to hear about HR analytics from you. And in my experience of the last 4-5 years being a consultant, I have realized that it's a blank slate for everyone. People with, let's say, 15-20 years of experience working in digital marketing or marketing analytics or financial analytics, they also seem overwhelmed now because there is so much change that is happening very rapidly, right? And I think this is great because everybody is at an even platform from where you can now learn to capitalize on it. I always talk about supply chain. I've had the opportunity of working on supply chain operations with a lot of firms. And I realized that that's one function which is still a laggard. And it's very ironical because supply chain is where ERPs and CRMs used to be there such a long time back, right? But that is also a weight. That's a weight on them because it's a lot of baggage. There is so much legacy data there. If you look at tools like SAP, it's great. It's a market leader, but at the same time, when it comes to analytics, they were not really able to make that shift, right? Primarily because they had that ready-made business with them, and it was not an easy shift, and that's why new players are coming in. Yeah. So it's very exciting to even think about what will happen in the next 1 or 2 years. And for me, what is very gratifying is that I work with big fours and consulting firms, that HR leaders and all the guys in HR are becoming participants. Earlier, I would be very surprised as to why is that HR would not come and attend, let's say, a Power BI training or an Excel training. Because I know for a fact that they are using it daily. And if they learn to use it better, they will, improve the efficiency, reduce the errors, reduce the turnaround time. And it's very pleasing to me because I've seen that shift happening in the last maybe 24 to 36 months, where there are specific trainings happening for HR as well, when it comes purely related to analytics. So I think that's a wonderful sign that I have seen.
Wonderful. And the one everybody needs to know about data science. And I was surprised to know that Mukesh Ambani learned Python a few months back. And if he can learn it, why can't we do that? So he's
absolutely.
And I really appreciate the work that you are doing, Avish, of really connecting what is there to what can be. So you provide that like a business analyst. It's more like making sense of data, and that's a very, very required kind of a role. And you help simplify it for multiple functions. You understand finance, supply chain, HR, and all.
Thank you, Rohit. I think now we are at a stage wherein you will not really have a lot of specialists because there is so much more integration happening between different functions. You will not really have somebody coming in just for a spreadsheet model consultation, right? Like somebody who works in spreadsheets now also has to learn maybe a little bit of data science or maybe work on big data. And I think the fact that now we have these self-service tools has made things a lot easier, because now you don't need MIS who has to download a report and send it to you. You
Yeah.
can directly connect to SQL Server from Power BI or even from Excel for that matter. But that also means that people have to now upskill themselves. And that would be the next question I want to talk about. In the last couple of years and what you expect to emerge in the next 3 to 5 years, how do you expect upskilling and employee training to change?
Great, very good question, Navish, and very close to my heart as well. When you look at upskilling and reskilling, it was a buzzword, a nice to have some time back, but it's 100% inevitable right now. And you see any of the reports that come in says 60% of the skills that we have right now will be obsolete in the next 3 years and so on. So the half-life of any skill has gone down to a large extent. So I look at a new classification of skills. So people call it soft skill, hard skill, hot skill, and so on. I look at it from a durability of the skill. So there's some skills which are very durable and which will stay on for a very long time. And there are some skills which are short-lived, they have a middle half-life, and those that are very short half-life. So for example, any new technology I would put into the last bucket. But how do you understand that technology? How do you put things into perspective? I would put into the first bucket, which is highly durable. Things like empathy, connecting with people, what people used to call soft skills, influencing, all of that I would put into the more durable skills, because humans are not going to change. They've not changed for a long time. How we actually are as people has not changed. So I put that into the first bucket. And that's very critical for the business, because in such a scenario right now, even if, for example, I'm a salesperson in a kind of a consumer durable or any other kind of B2B business, not a consumer durable, but a B2B business, I used to go into the customer's office, look at the ambience, connect with people, get visual cues while talking to the person and so on. Now we don't have any of that. It's about connecting to people on calls and on video calls, and then understanding the customer, understanding the client, their need, and selling at the same time. So how do I do that switch? That's also upskilling. It's a huge part of upskilling as well. In the IT services industry, there are no more plain contracts. Contracts now have hyper automation, not just automation, but also hyper automation. When you're thinking of the solution, you have to bake in what's the savings that's going to come in year 2 and year 3. So if you are someone who's in a development center, you're just following orders, what others have told you to do and so on, and do not understand the client's business, how you doing impacts them, then you're not really adding much value to it. Earlier, there were a lot of layers and a lot of padding. Managers used to pad, then they used to be online, the customer-facing roles and so on. Now, all of them have reduced. So people are directly facing the customer. And this is in all kinds of businesses. So there's a set of core skills, which could be your technical expertise, as well as a set of core human skills, which come into play. And constant updating is what is required. How has learning responded? Learning has not responded as well as they should. And that's predominantly because the learning function is not so connected with the business. And once they're more connected, and I've seen that a lot happening more now, they understand the pains of the business and can shift gears very easily into what is really required. So the learning team is no longer a creator, but more a curator of content, curator of learning experiences. Experiences have become extremely important now. For example, imagine a person who's constantly on Zoom, and then you have one more Zoom call for Zoom or MS Teams for learning as well. So how will you get there? And then there's so many things happening in the house. There's a background noise, there's COVID in between and so on. So how do you get their real attention? And that also brings me to the other point of creating motivation for learning. It's the job of each individual. Each one of us owns our own learning. I spend quite a bit of what I earn, a good percentage of what I earn in relearning for myself. Every year I look for certain certifications, some learning experiences, some new things that I do. And I think that's why I've been able to somewhat keep in pace. It's still not the way that I would like to be, but somewhat keep in pace. because what I've learned in college, I don't think I apply it at all. There's no chance, because the world has changed so much since the last 18 years since I started working. So to conclude, constant upgradation is the employee's role. Organizations can support it, but it's the employee's role to do it. Look at what your organization has, look at what's there externally, become learning magnets, and also teach others. The more you teach, the more you learn as well. One more aspect is, you might have heard of this, the magic ratio, 70-20-10. How we learn is 70% through everyday, 20% through interacting with people. Like this was also a learning for me. And 10% is through formal learning experiences. What's happened is that 20% is in danger now, because we're not meeting clients every day. We don't have those the Slack moments where we would also chat about other things and get to know about things and be curious about things. Now organizations have become cut, just topic, one meeting to the other, back-to-back meetings. There is not even 2 minutes to jump from one to the other. So when will someone teach a colleague? When will you learn from others? So that 20% is in danger. And that's where we need to focus on as learning experts, and also as individuals. How do we build that Slack? How do we proactively connect with our colleagues and learn from them? And that also means focus on what do we really want to learn, who are the people that we really want to connect with, and so on. So those are some spaces that I see for learning and upskilling. I'm not sure I've answered all areas that you would like to cover, but if you have any specific question, I can take that and cover that as well.
I want to talk about the fact that we have all these wonderful tools with us, and these tools have become self-service. So everybody across the organization, being a non-technical or a technical person, has the ability of punching in a few numbers, clicking on a few buttons, and getting a regression line or getting some results. But it is the communication, right, which is still a challenge, because people have not been taught systematically how to communicate the results that are coming from these software, or from these tools. When you talk about durability, the first thing that comes to my mind as an analyst is that when I consult my organizations, I'm not just helping them get to the results, I'm also helping them to communicate it to their managers and to their stakeholders, right? If I'm not doing that job, then it's just a report on a piece of paper, right?
Yeah.
And there are no actionable insights that you can derive from it. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it, in terms of how important you feel this communication aspect is.
Yeah, I think that's the core. Because all data is helping us make certain decisions for current and for the future. And this is something that's not changed. What's changed is that we are having more data. The world is much more complex than it used to, but the human mind cannot look at all of this complexity. Therefore, we need to present it in a simple manner to our stakeholders. So the new skills that will be very important is also data storytelling. How you present that data to make for your stakeholder to make sense. It's easy to put 30 graphs and make your presentation look really fancy, but what's coming out of that is even the person who's made it will not understand what's coming out of it. And therefore, what you teach, for example, I've seen that being used by the HR team is extremely. They understand that you teach both the angles. One is how do you connect with the technical skill and learn that, and then convert that into insights that can be presented, and how do you present that as well. So each of these elements are important. And like you said earlier, each of this is now being done by one person. It's not 3 different people. And so that one person needs to be multi-skilled. And that also brings me to the point of each of us needs to be multi-skilled. We can't silo ourselves into one area. There was this T-shaped learning model earlier where we said that be deeply skilled in one area and then know about a lot of other things. Now it's called the M shape or the W shape and so on, where you're multi-skilled in multiple areas. There are few, and you don't have one single skill that you are only one skill. But there is a need for multi-skilling as well. And that's also very important from the data, understanding data kind of perspective.
All
So
right. Another topic I would like to talk about is total cost of ownership. You mentioned that. Now, usually TCO is a term that we associate with, let's say, enterprise sales. You sell a software and then you talk about the total cost of ownership over a period of time. But even when it comes to trainings, an area that I handle for my clients, I always tell them that while you have a budget for the software, so you know that, let's say you want to spend 35 lakhs a year for getting a license of Power BI, and you have a budget of, let's say, 10 lakhs for training people. Training is not a one-time task, right? It is an intervention that will happen regularly. And I'm not sure why, but when I speak to CXOs, there is still a lot of legacy mentality when it comes to training, where it's just that one budget that is allocated at the beginning of the year, and then we have to stick to that. While organizations are very eager to update software and purchase new software, I don't think training gets the level of commitment that I feel it should, because simply purchasing the software is not the end of the road. I think that's just the beginning of the journey. Because if you're not upskilling people, I think you're only doing half the job.
yeah.
So what would be your thoughts on that?
Uh, that's a very good thought of including this in the total cost of ownership, and I think leaders are not really looking at how it will be applied. You're getting a new software, there's a tick box that's there, but how will humans actually work and use that? That part is not getting covered. So, and this is not a pure training budget; it's a deployment budget. When you're deploying that software, this is required for you to deploy it in the right way. So I think this should be bundled up along with the cost, and initial budget itself should have that. And procurement teams could have a form or a process that says what else do you need to deploy this and get the ROI of the software, and just not install. So it's not about installation, but about realization of the reason for the installation. So to get that realization of the outcome, you have to have this component. And it's not just training, it's enablement, as I would call it, enabling people to use that, which might mean job aids, skill aids to getting to the end outcome, and so on. It might not be just a training, but that entire space, which is more in the domain of behavioral engineering. How do you use that to get the outcome? There's not enough thought on that, and it requires a multi-department conversation, learning experts coming together with the software experts and so on. There is a new role that is in a lot of the IT firms that I've seen, IT product companies, which is like a consumption expert or a consumption manager. It helps you, how do you consume the service that you have bought? So I think that is what is needed at an internal perspective itself also. So how do we well consume the service that we're getting, the software?
Right. The third thing I want to talk about is, you mentioned the curation of content, which I have been a strong believer in. I think the challenge that we have today is that there is such an overwhelming amount of content, especially if I look at the area of analytics. Every second week, there is something new happening. There are updates happening much more regularly. An example would be Microsoft Excel. I have been working on Excel for 15 years, and Microsoft typically used to have a 3-year update cycle. So we had 2007, 10, 13, 16, and 19. But now things have changed because organizations more or less have moved to Microsoft on the cloud with Microsoft 365. What I've realized is that now they have like a 15-day update cycle. So every 15 days, they fix bugs. Every 15 days, they have a new feature. They constantly take user feedback and they're able to work on it. So I was listening to another podcast by this gentleman who was interviewing Brian Jones. Brian Jones is the Excel head for Microsoft, right? He has been spearheading the entire Excel universe for many years for Microsoft. And what he said was very interesting. He said that the challenge of working on a tool like Word, PowerPoint, Excel, which is so pervasive. I mean, there are 750 million people in the world at any point who are working on Excel. He said that if we have a software coming in a particular year, let's say in 2019, and we start to think of what are the things we want to change in the next version, it will be a 3-year time span before that gets rolled out. And even when it gets rolled out, it is not that organizations will immediately pick it up. So Rohit, I'm sure from your experience, you would also have seen that there are a lot of factors which come into play when it comes to updating software. There is a cost factor, there is an upskilling factor. So it takes a lot of time for everybody in the organization to get updated to the new software. So what Brian said was that when our team is thinking of new ideas, we have to think 5 years ahead. Because if you're thinking of what is current and what is it that users are using right now, by the time it becomes commonplace, will be 5 years down the road. And by then things will change, so much faster. So it's very interesting to get this perspective, because the way organizations like Microsoft have to design software and have to build features, they really have to be a visionary in terms of looking at what people will expect in the next 5 years. And I think that has really become much easier now due to the fact that the update cycle has become much shorter. So now that it's on the cloud, it happens much faster. But what I would like to ask you about is the curation of content. Curation obviously is very important since there is such an overwhelming amount of content out there. Do you feel that people in learning and development should have at least a working understanding or maybe a very high level overview of various areas in technology? Because I genuinely believe, and I speak to CHROs, I tell them that if you are not aware of what is happening in the spectrum of technology, how will you curate the right training for your folks, right? So if you say that I have no idea about what are the new trends in AI and ML, then how will you even find the right trainer and have a conversation with that person, right? I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that in terms of how L&D should be able to curate the right content for the people.
Yeah, a very relevant point, Avish. The L&D for a long time has been the source of content creation, and it's like we create and everybody else has to consume. And in a world which is more distributed, where knowledge is being created everywhere, we talk more about user-generated content right now. That users generate, and even in organizations, they put it out like a marketplace, and others consume and use that, following experts and how they work on things and so on. While this is there, organizations do have subscriptions to these large content bases, and it's required to curate them because it's overwhelming for people to use. And I think breaking that down into micro learning and putting that into the flow of work, you don't have to come to a place to get learning. Learning comes to you constantly. So there are these tools also. For example, you don't even need to Google. In the tool that we use, you just right click and say, go to search for this in your learning management system, and it directly gets there. Content curation is required for ensuring learning is at the time of need. For example, at the time where I'll give an HR example of performance development, performance management is when managers need to know how to actually give feedback and reinforce difficult conversations and so on. And similarly for employees at the time of need. So at the time of need, if they get, for example, when you are sending that invite to set that conversation, if at that time the system also picks up and says, we see that you're setting up this conversation, here is what you might like to learn and so on. And now that learning is also in the flow of work, so that gets into MS Teams. So people use MS Teams for 75% of their work, and then learning is also on MS Teams, and you can tag people, learn there, and so on. So that's the entire piece of learning in the flow of work. Curation is required to break down these huge data learning repositories into something which people can understand. And if the learning team, which is supposed to do this, does not understand the technologies and the life of the learner, how is the day in the life of the learner, how much time do they have to really study, and what is important for them, both from an individual and an organization perspective, that's key. So as I see it, the overlap of three things, if you look at it as a Venn diagram, it needs to ask the question, the employee needs to answer the question, what is required from my organization? What's the focus of my organization? What's the focus of my department? What's the focus and my role? And what is my focus? Where do I want to go? If all of these three are married, that's when there's a high impact learning development goal that is created there. And learning team's role is to educate people about this, about the overlap. If, for example, I like photography and spend a lot of my time in doing those courses, and the company also has those courses, but it's only satisfying one of the three aspects of that Venn diagram. So all the three aspects is what is required, and content curation is a key skill which is required from L&D. Don't create content, curate a lot of content. I'm saying that even for learners and people who are in their early careers, follow experts who follow the best content, and then you will get to know what's the best content to study for yourself. So I think those are some tips that I had around that area. I want to learn more formal aspects of curation as well. I think I'm not caught up to that extent.
All right. So I want to change lanes now and talk about something different. Now I do appraisals and I handle the analytics component of appraisals for a lot of clients. And all the organizations that I'm working with, some of these are MNCs, billion-dollar companies, they're either using the performance potential matrix or some variation of the performance potential matrix. And in my own small way, I'm trying to incorporate additional elements in it. So rather than having that half yearly or that yearly traditional cycle, I'm trying to incorporate more aspects, and more parameters that you can make a part of the assessment. So I would just like to understand from you that now that we have more data around us and we have more analytics with us, how has the entire appraisal process changed for organizations?
Yeah. So the classic example I would say is, imagine you have an annual cycle in your company, which goes as per the calendar year, and you set some goals in January of 2020. And then the next goal that you're setting in January of 2021. The world has changed completely. What you focus on is changing, how you're approaching customers is changing, what you deliver is changing, how you're delivering is changing constantly. So real-time performance management is not a nice to have, but it's an imperative for following the real world as things change. So you set your goals and constantly set your goals at any time during the year, and constantly have conversations with your manager to enable you to meet them and meet your career goals at the same time, longer term career goals at the same time. So first of all, performance management, continuous performance management is an imperative. And a lot of tools are also taking that method up. You talked about performance and potential. Some elements have not changed. For example, potential is more for the long term. And it is like taking a bet on the person and saying who will really accelerate within the organization. Whose potential technically means the potential to take on two roles above what you're currently doing and do it well. So organizations need to bet on those people and so on. And executive time is limited. You can't keep reviewing the organizational talent constantly. Leaders can't keep doing that. So therefore, there's an annual cycle and a process and so on. So a data that used to get in there is performance ratings and some sort of a potential assessment. I think a lot more things need to go in. They are going in, like you said, like you're also incorporating. A lot more things need to go in, which is one is the aspect of micro credentialing. For example, if I did a stretch project, a career now is a portfolio of experiences. And when you're doing a performance potential, that portfolio needs to be in place, and the leaders also need to be able to see it. So micro-credentialing is a great way. You took this certificate, you got a badge. That badge will now be in the future will be on a blockchain, and you know that what the person has done, it's there forever. And then you do a stretch project and there's an outcome of it. That also gets into a micro-credential. So each element of the 70-20-10 could get into a micro-credential, and that goes into the performance potential matrix. What happened in the conversation needs to get it. What's the aspiration of the person needs to get it. For example, if the organization says, I'm great for this role and I'm giving you that role, but I said 3 quarters back, I told you that that's not what I'm getting. But that conversation is not captured anywhere. So those conversations need to be converted into something that is more actionable for the organization. And there needs to be this bubbling up of that data, and you need to be having that data at your fingertips, the high level and the low level and so on, especially when employees are not face to face. You can't rely on what I think about that person or what I think that that person needs and so on. So all of this needs more data, and those constant conversations can some elements of that be recorded as well, continuous performance management conversations, and use that in performance potential grids and so on. So that's what I see. It's a very exciting space, and there's a lot to be done in the intersection of human skills, technology, conversations, and so on. So yeah.
Right. You mentioned capturing conversations, and I think with 9 out of 10 clients that I work with, there are these fancy surveys that happen throughout the year with the best of intentions, where you ask about what are your key expectations, where do you see yourself a year down the line, what inputs do you want from your manager. And when I work with the CHRO, the first thing they tell me is delete that column before you do the analysis. And I ask them, why are you capturing the data if you either do not have the willingness to look at it or the inability to analyze it, right? And sentiment analysis, I think, is a huge role, which can be played when it comes to analyzing this. And we're still in the very early days, because the way you're capturing data is also super important, because it's not a post-mortem. You can't just get some raw data and say that, let's make it fancy now. The way you ask the question has a huge impact to play. And that's what a lot of organizations don't realize, that the job of an analyst cannot be, once the data is captured and you send an email to us and say that, give me something out of this. We have to be a part of these conversations right from the onset, because how are you capturing the KPIs and the parameters that would help us doing the sentiment analysis is super important. Now, you mentioned potential, and coming to the last leg of our podcast about what actionable points can BSchool students take away from it. Now, I have trained MTs at a lot of organizations. And since I work with organizations over a period of time, I meet them over a period of time, right, for different interventions. And it's very interesting because I am a part of their orientation. So without wanting to, in my head, I do a mapping, who's the best prospect and who I feel is probably a laggard or somebody who needs to work a little harder. And it's surprising to see that some people have an accelerated path while others just, either quit the organization or are not able to perform to the extent that we expected them to. So what are these factors, what are these traits, and what is it that an organization looks at? I am sure that it's not just numbers. I think the difference between an 85% and 90% is too little to really, pick the 90% with, right? It has to be more than that. So from an actionable point for BSchool students, what is it that you would tell them, once they become management trainees after their MBA is over? What are the things that they should keep in mind?
Yeah, great question, Avish. And having seen management trainees in multiple companies and how they grow, I have some hypothesis about how they grow. So it's not just the ability of the person, and it's the aspiration, definitely, but also the engagement with the company, which is very important. So I've seen these brilliant minds who get onto a lot of projects and say, we're going to change this, change that, do something, but get frustrated or stopped with the existing mindset in the organization, or what is a given in the organization. Those that look at things realistically, not with rose-tinted glasses, but they see that it is a tough ask. It's not going to be done in a few months. I will have to hold on. I will have to create my credibility. I will then move and make these changes which are there. And I know that I'm constantly taking one step at a time to build that. That is very important, because you can't keep fighting with how the organization is right now. The organization also wants to change, but they can't do that to that extent. I'm saying this in general. Most organizations, when someone comes in as a fresher, they want the world to be different and they want to make it different and so on. Great intention. With that, you need to couple that with a lot of tenacity, a lot of grit as well. Otherwise, you will not be able to continue that. I've seen some who move from a great offer in campus, but get bored in a few months, go to a startup. Then that startup doesn't weigh in what they're saying. Then they go to another startup or they go to another organization. But everywhere they'll find the same situation. But if you look at this situation as something that is a learning opportunity as well, and keep strengthening how you interact with that system and do well, That's where success really lies. That another thing is fundamentally being connected to the sector in which the company is, as well as the company's objectives and values. These are softer angles, but very important. So when people choose a job or a first role, look at these elements. The first manager makes a lot of difference because you learn a lot of fundamental stuff from that, but also create your group of mentors. And it's called like a personal board. So it's Havish Incorporated if you're joining into the company, and then you have your personal board. And they're people who are mentors, they're truth tellers who tell you on the face how you're doing and without any filters. Then there's a coach, there's a technical expert, and so on. So have this set of people. You need to build them. The organization is not going to give it to you on a platter, and so on. So I think that is one. Second, I see is with how fast the world is changing. For example, someone says, I'm a 2021 MBA pass out. I've never seen my batchmates. And it's so unfortunate I didn't get the best of placements and so on. So what is a lot of it playing is in their minds. And the mind needs a solution to be stabilized and so on. So I see that meditation, use of mindfulness is extremely important. So to cover those constant ups and downs that will keep happening in the external world. So how do we respond? So that's one more power skill, as I call it, and something that I would advise. I give very little advice, but advise BSchool students also to kind of take that up. Anybody, but especially students to take that up as well. So in conclusion, it is have that. It's not a sprint; it's a marathon. A career is a marathon. Think about it. Take good decisions which are in the alignment of what you like doing, what the world needs, what the world is willing to pay for you, and so on, and align it to your purpose constantly. That is required. The world does not owe you anything. Just because you've got a great degree, just because you've got great scores, just because you've got done great stuff, the world does not owe you anything. You have to constantly prove yourself. You have to constantly make a difference, make an impact, and manage yourself. Is what I would say, Havish. I hope that kind of answers the question. And I want to wish all the viewers all the best, all the listeners all the best of this podcast. If there are two students both passing out of 2021, one says, what a miserable place, how bad that I've passed out at this point of time. And there's the other one says, I'm taking it in my stride. I've still made friends in spite of us being virtual. I've still had a great experience in spite of it being virtual. I've completely accepted that this is how the world is. And there's nothing personal. The world does not have anything against me. It is just that the situation is like that. And I am making the best out of it. The second person, even if they don't have great scores, has a much better chance of success in real life than the first person. So be that person is what I would say, Avish.
Always the glass half full. So it was an absolute pleasure having you today with us, Rohit.
Thanks, Avish. It was a pleasure talking to you, and great topics. Your questions are very insightful as well. I'm sure the podcast listeners will have a good time listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.